We're joined by the former Laois and AFL player Colm Begley, who's the GPA's player engagement manager, ex-Irish rugby star Anna Caplice, and psychologist Mark Smyth. We want to talk about online abuse of sports people, their experiences, what we're seeing, what we can do maybe to improve the situation in this society, because sometimes it just gets completely out of hand and it's never going to be eradicated, but sometimes it just gets over the line. So Colm, you're working with the GPA. Is there this going on much in GA? Online abuse, online stick? Did you experience it yourself much? What's your story?
Yeah, and it could have been my Laois accent that was a problem, John. I'm not sure about that.
We've Shane Keegan on here enough. No, the Laois accent's great. So go ahead.
Look, I think in regards abuse, online abuse, I suppose for me personally as a player, you probably have some on the pitch here and there. I was fortunate enough I didn't have too much realistically when we were playing, but the online abuse thing is something that we've seen more and more of over the last number of years. So I think we wanted to try and see how deep the problem was within Intercounty GAA, first of all, with my role. So we've done a survey last year in December. We had around 720 players. And we asked about where they might be getting abuse, whether it's an issue, the type and content. And one of the big surprising things for us, John, was that 94% of players said they'd never experienced online abuse. Which is surprising for us because it seems so prevalent in the game. That being said, we obviously had interactions with, I suppose, high-profile players who were probably the biggest target and the easiest target for online abuse with their profile, and that's had a massive impact on those players when it happens to them. So, despite it not being huge from what we're seeing, it's still a pretty powerful and pretty important topic to discuss and engage with, because the implications of it are very, very hard on players.
And especially with players going to a day job then on a Monday morning or back to work, they're not getting paid for this, and it's inherently unfair if they're an amateur as well. Not that it's acceptable in any way in any sphere, but
no, but it actually, like I think Mark said it before, your guest, I'm not sure if it was her, but he mentioned that it affects not only the person but also their network around them, their family members, the place they work. So having an effect on them is one thing as well, but it can have an immediate effect on the people around them too, which is unfair. And look, I think it's the world we live in. It's very hard to stop this abuse or these conversations happening on Twitter and social media. It just opens up a platform for everyone to have an opinion. I say opinions with a very broad spectrum, but I think we probably need to look at how we can minimise the high level of abuse going towards these people. It's unfair.
Would you have known from speaking to people, or even yourself, how it would have affected people directly?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Well, I spoke with players even outside of my role, but I spoke with the players obviously with my role who've had, after certain games, incidents within matches that have had abuses, DM messages straight towards them, emails as well, and a lot of players thankfully have built up a bit of resilience to be able to handle it, coping strategies, which I think is something we could talk more about here, but it is difficult no matter how strong-willed you are. Getting these messages directly to you, or even to members of family as well, in certain instances, that's difficult to handle, because I think you can handle it yourself, but if it's affecting someone outside or someone close to you, that's difficult,
Anna Caplice, how did anything that you receive affect you?
I think that I found it incredibly frustrating, like coming from a rugby side where, rugby has traditionally been a men's sport. You have a lot of, predominantly male fans who kind of all of a sudden seem to be very defensive about, the women's game growing, and felt like they needed to just shout down about the women's game publicly and using, sometimes an anonymized account, but often not. Like often supporters just very happy to say, well, the women's game isn't worth anything, and it wasn't often directed personally at me or my teammates. Sometimes yes, but often just at the women's game, and I found it massively frustrating because it's a whole demographic of supporters who seem to be kind of egging each other on to not only not support the women's game, but find a reason to kind of say that it shouldn't be there, or the most frustrating things that I came across were disband the women's game or withdraw their funding because because they're not performing, and publicly saying these things, trying to gather support around that. And fine if you don't support it, fine, but looking for other people to kind of band together with to kind of support your cause about why women shouldn't be playing sport, or, you know, in my case it was rugby. And I find myself, you know, being asked about this now, because I sometimes, not always, but I sometimes just couldn't hold my tongue to people who were talking online about our performances or about just women's rugby or women's sport in general. And I would say something online, and often I'd get a lot of people responding to me saying, Anna, don't bother, you know, but I'm happy that I did, and I'm proud that I did, because I personally have seen those voices dwindle online, you know, when the people shouting down about the women's game. And actually, you know, social media gives us so many different ways to practice things and express things, but we can use it a lot, especially at the, you know, the cusp of professionalization in the women's game. We can use social media for amazing things, but that is the one downside of it. And I think that, you know, people need to learn how to use it more appropriately. And, you know, I heard an interesting point recently that was like, do we make all social media accounts verified?
Yeah.
And will that then, you know, feed into, you know, more positive, you know, support around sport in the future?
Is there a privacy issue there? I suppose it's the only maybe thing that might be stopping that. But like, to me, social media, going on Twitter, going on Facebook, going on all these things, Instagram is a choice. So if you choose to do it, then why not have to verify and be accountable for who you are? And then I'd love to see how much that would diminish the kind of stick that people give each other. Would you have felt angry? Would you have felt upset? Would it have got you at all at any stage, Anna?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, just again, like it was not hugely personal at me, but I felt it like it was personal because they were attacking, you know, Irish women's rugby. And sometimes, you know, it was across different countries and things like that, and women's rugby in other countries. But when you're giving absolutely everything, you know, like outside of your job, and you're training full time and you're working full time, and then someone, it doesn't even matter who they are, you don't even know who that person is, but it does get to you. Like it annoys you, and sometimes it doesn't, but it could depend on how you're feeling that day. And, you know, people have to realize that you can support the game all you want, but there has to be a line between being frustrated. Yeah, you want your team that you support to do well. But at what point do you go online and direct abuse, where there has to be a line of understanding there? Like, I support my team, and yes, I'm entitled to get frustrated with performances or selections, or I'm entitled to be frustrated about that because they're my team and I support them. But there has to be a line where you go, okay, now one step further is too much. I'm not going to go online and say, I can say I'm frustrated with things and whatever, but to direct it at a player or players or a team is just unacceptable.
Yeah, Mark Smyth, without naming names, I'm sure athletes you've dealt with have had difficult times on occasion on social media.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I've seen a lot of, especially with younger players and younger athletes, have this dilemma, because being online is so much part of a young person's identity these days, where they express themselves, where they connect with others. But also then you are exposed to potentially abusive comments. And what I think has changed, and what's really kind of upsetting, is the fact that the comments are no longer just about the performance on the field. It's not just about how you played in a particular game. We're seeing racial slurs. We're seeing people commenting on players' body shapes, thinking that they have some sort of entitlement to make a judgment around what a person's body shape is or should look like. And that goes across all codes. I think in particular, and some people have spoken publicly in the media about it within the women's game, about, you know, people who play in the pack and about what their body should look like. And that's just not okay. So when players or athletes of any kind, of any code, are getting this level of personal attacks, they're human as well. They're people, and they're not just this player you see on the TV. They have the same thoughts, the same worries, the same doubts that we all do, and sometimes even more so, because their careers and when they're getting paid for it or getting picked for it are dependent on their performances. So we all manage self-doubt on a day-to-day basis, and our own thoughts, and managing our own thoughts can be a very difficult thing to do. But then when you weigh in the Mr. Egg Shape on Twitter, who thinks that you should have made this pass or you should have made this particular play, and that gets in on top of you. And as Anna said, sometimes it just takes one comment. that then adds to those self-doubts. And with our, with the women's game, going back to their day jobs, going back to study, with our inter-county players, with their day jobs going to study, they're trying to manage the stresses of daily life as well as all of this. And for many, it's a huge amount to try and cope with.
We're speaking here to Mark Smyth, a clinical psychologist, former Laois and AFL player Colm Begley, and ex-Irish rugby star Anna Caplice on online abuse of sports people. Have you folks out there on 53106, cost of 30 cents, ever been subjected to online abuse for playing sport? Get in touch with your stories, your comments or your questions. 53106. The abuse some male players and management get is totally disgusting and uncalled for. Social media has got a lot to answer for, says Sean in Westport. Can you ask Colm about Zach Toohey getting stick in the AFL? From John in Longford. Did Zach get stick, Colm?
I suspect he got stick on the field, but there's a lot of kind of give and take on the AFL grounds during matches. It's not really stuff that probably would stick for after the game, to be honest. As I said, for players, build a pretty big resilience when we're getting abuse on the field. The off the field stuff, potentially, some stuff about being Irish and different things back and forth. But the AFL actually have done a lot of work on that, trying to reduce the online abuse and even cancel, memberships to some members if they are giving abuse, or cancel accounts and work with Meta, work with Facebook. They're doing a lot of work on that, I think, over the last year or so. So I think it's kind of something you need to look at as well. But just on one of the points there, John, about, I think Mark mentioned, the concept of social media being a massive part now, especially of the younger people coming through. Identity, part of their lives, most of their communication involved with is using it to communicate, and even maybe get some confidence in certain areas. I think there's definitely a bit of work that needs to be done in there about how much weight younger people put on comments from strangers or from outside people. It's, I think Andy McEntee in your show the other night mentioned about, he mentioned that he had thought, who's this person I don't know? Like, how much weight do I put on that person's opinion that I've never really spoken to before or engaged with before, probably has never been asked opinion before, and he's giving this opinion about me or statement about me. Do I really carry much weight in that? I think that was a great way of looking at it, and I'm not sure whether younger players, younger people, younger athletes have that same mentality from social media, those comments, how impactful they are, how much they can affect them. It's not easy, I'm sure, and like Mark said, it's not easy to do it, and even Anna said it's not easy to look away from it, but I definitely think there's more weight now on these comments from people that don't know, and they're taking a little more heed to it. So there'll be a bit of education piece, I think, with players and athletes on that, how to be more resilient with it.
Yeah,
so you can't get rid of it. It's going to be impossible to get rid of it with the platforms. You can definitely reduce it, but very hard to get rid of those comments,
It's like back to Colm, to the old expression that, somebody's not going to go up to Colm Begley on the street and say what they say to you online.
Exactly it. I think Anna mentioned about do we look at the accounts being verified and having to actually have your name to it. I think that would help, definitely. I'm not sure how the legality of it all, but that would definitely help. But you're right. Like, if I'm after a game and someone comes up and tells me face to face, they won't tell me the same thing as going to do on a keyboard, and that's why I think it's going to be very difficult to try and change or reduce fully these comments coming at people. But how can we make sure our players, our athletes, our young adults can handle them better,
Yeah, Mark, it's a case that there are very few pastimes or jobs or things you do where you're critiqued in real time. That is the bizarre thing about being a sports person.
It is, and it's something that is a reality that we have to accept on that. And I think, having worked with athletes for a number of years now, even in my own kind of following, I'm a Laois man like Colm, and following Laois or following Leinster or Ireland or any of the other clubs that I support, I'm much more tempered now in my commentary on social media about performances and about the game, while trying to balance that piece of being a fan and sometimes getting frustrated with the results, but also knowing that this could have an impact on that person. I think we have to have more, as maybe one of the guys said there about education around digital literacy, but we need to be starting that at a young age. I think as well as that, we can't really, unfortunately, be appealing to reason with people that, please be nicer because of the impact that this has on a person. Because we know in society, if you're driving down the motorway and you're going too fast and the only consequence is, well, please don't do that again, it's not enough of a deterrent and a consequence. So I think we need real world consequences for the things that we say. And I think we're having this conversation about online abuse, but I think it also has to take in the context of it's still occurring in the real world as well. So any of us who go to any code at a Laois GA match or underage matches that I go to, I'm a GA coach myself, sometimes I'm hearing coaches being abusive to underage referees, being abusive to their other players. And we need everybody to step in and say, you know what, this isn't okay. that we need to take responsibility for putting an end to this. But I think when we're looking at all of these different incidences, the one thing that we can't do is the area of self-regulation by social media companies has to end. We've seen over the years, and by the fact we're having this conversation, they cannot be trusted to self-regulate, to regulate inappropriate behaviour. So at the moment, we have a draft online safety bill going through the Dáil that's being debated by the politicians. And there's a lot of welcome elements to that. One in particular is the fact there's going to be an online safety commissioner. But what they're still debating is whether there'll be an individual complaints mechanism. And they're really not sure about whether they want to do that. But if we want to stop this, what we have to do is give people the tools and the empowerment to be able to make a complaint and say, look, this wasn't okay. I'm not happy with this. This was abusive and you have to make this stop.
Do you think it's going to make a difference in terms of them getting something through legislatively, Mark?
I think it will, because I think many of us, myself included, have been subject to a lot of abusive commentary at times and made a report to Twitter and said, look, this is abusive, and they come back and say, well, it didn't violate our guidelines. But it violated mine in terms of how I felt about it. So we need something, a higher authority that, look, if you don't get the remedy that you want from a social media company, that you can go to someone with legislative powers to be able to say, you know what, that was abusive, you need to take that down. I think that's how we protect people. It's not just about the responsibility to themselves to be resilient, because everybody has a limit. You cannot just keep taking personalized attacks or attack on your game, attacks on your professionalism, and just be able to suck it up and to manage that all the time. We need people to come in and protect players, to protect people, and to make the online world safer through robust legislation.
And it's interesting, Anna, that I suppose athletes are very comfortable if they've got a physical niggle, but if they've got a mental niggle, it might be sometimes harder for them to come forward and say that this is bothering me, because maybe they're kind of trained, you just got to be tough and get on with it, and just take these kind of things as just anonymous losers or whatever. But it still can sometimes ebb away at your confidence and your feeling about things. And I suppose just to be able to just come forward and say, this is an injury of some description, as minor as it might be, is important for any athlete who might be kind of bottling it up, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I think that because it's never really been done, no one has ever, gone to Twitter or whoever and said, oh, look, these are, just like the example Mark said there, this is how it made me feel. None of my teammates have ever gone through that process of, look at this, and this is how it made me feel. It's been dealt with, and now I know it's not going to happen again. That's never happened. I've never seen that happen. You click on a little button. When I see crappy comments on something, on someone, and you can report someone. I've had to do that recently for someone who was targeting me online, and I just clicked report abusive. Okay, done. How do I know anything is being done about that? I don't know, and I'm living, wondering, is this person going to come after me again? And eventually, what happened is I'm not sure how this sits with me, but you end up blocking an account who keeps going after you or keeps disagreeing with you, and is that the answer as well? To block them, or how do I know that they're not just going along and doing that to someone else, or that they won't just create another account to come after me, or that's not that comforting either, to block someone and then I can't see what they're debating further. Not I want to, but I just want to know that that I'm safe from that happening. But what I find interesting is the point that Colm made there about why should I let this person I've never met say something about me and have it affect me? Yeah, I agree with that, and of course some days it might get you down, and some days it might not, and some days it could really badly affect you. But what I've kind of started to notice, and like I say, I have seen a positive change in how people discuss the women's game online, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. What I find interesting is I click on the likes, who has liked this, and not just to do with women's sports, just some racial slur or homophobic slur or something. If you click on the likes, it might shock you, because it's shocked me to see that it's a lot of young people wearing sporting jerseys, wearing a rugby jersey, a GAA jersey, and now they haven't, maybe I shouldn't let that comment affect me, but now there's people who think that this comment is okay and they've liked it and they've agreed to it, even though they haven't written it themselves, they haven't been brave enough, or they're not stupid enough to write it themselves, but they are liking, this comment, which is giving them, oh, someone else feels like that, now I can feel like that. It's kind of validating their own sense of like, I think that this person is rubbish, or I think this person is whatever they're saying about them. Like, I like, have a look at that. And actually, I would encourage people to be careful what you're liking, because it can be seen, and it's not a good place to be liking those comments. It's not a good move. If you think you're doing well by not saying anything that you would like to, you're going to get some kind of satisfaction in sending abuse at some player, and you've decided not to do that, but you have decided to like it, well, that's just as bad, if not worse, in my eyes. And do have a look at that. And I think that I think you could be shocked by what you see and the number of jerseys that you see when you click into that.
Maybe people don't think it's as serious as if they were going to do it in person, and that's the blurred and Wild West element of social media that the normal rules don't apply when they should apply. Colm, do you think the social media companies do enough? Like, you're working with the GPA now, you're in player engagement. Are they doing enough to clamp down on unacceptable behaviour out in that internet sphere?
Mark probably would know more about, but I think like from what we're seeing, they're probably not. It's been talked about for years and years now, about clamping down more on not just like abuse for players, but abuse for people online. And there's been multiple different things talked about verifying accounts and looking at putting more stringent consequences in, or reporting platforms in. So I don't think there is enough being done. I think what I mentioned before about the mentality, and as well, just to kind of go back on that, about, I think that it's not as easy just to go, okay, that won't affect me, I don't know a person. But I think if we can start maybe training our young individuals, or educating them at a younger age about how to deal with this thing, because it's so prevalent in their life, social media, and such a massive involvement in what they do, that if it has a really powerful impact on how they think about themselves, how they see the world, and they can't deal with negative comments, but they're going to be bothered down the line, because unfortunately it'll come. I think, John, there needs to be more done from the platforms, definitely. And I do think that whether it's policy or whether it's something from the government, that would help put more stringent guidelines in place, more consequences in place. That would be important for them to look at. And I think national and government bodies, sporting bodies, we can play a big role in that and pushing it a bit more. And as Anna said as well, social media can be negative, but it also is powerful too when people get behind a cause. So, and the more positive reinforcement we get online for women's sports, for different things, and positive comments, and maybe even pushing the agenda again about trying to get these people who are online keyboard warriors, so to speak, trying to put some more rules in place to stop it would be useful from us. So I don't think there's enough being done, but I do think it goes both ways. We need to have some guidelines, some rulings in place, some more work from the social media platforms, but then also I think more education for our younger players and individuals about how to handle these things online and how to deal with them effectively.
And what would you have found is the best way to handle it, Colm?
Well, I'm kind of fortunate enough, John. I don't really use social media that much. Like, realistically, I use it a small bit. I go online and for Instagram and Twitter and different things, but nothing major. I don't invest that much time into it, really. So, and even when I was over in AFL, I didn't really pay too much heed to comments online or anything like that. And most of them have been positive enough, really, for most things I've had. So I've been fortunate in that sense. But I think I do appreciate that, to the point I mentioned before, we need to figure a way of, if these comments are coming at you, normal comments on Twitter, and Twitter seems to be the place where everyone can throw their opinion up, and it's a little bit of a poison chalice sometimes. I think Instagram's a bit different, but Twitter seems to be a place where everyone can have multiple accounts and different opinions on it, and create conversations and likes and so on and so forth. But I think it's just up to the people and the individuals to figure out the perception of what to take on as important and how much weight to put onto these comments. I'm not saying they're right, I'm not saying they are right, but trying to figure out how can they take these things on board, or not look at them and go by them, or else just take them on board and see what they are for reality, that they're just a comment from someone I don't know, that has no real weight in my life, however nasty it might be. Now, with that being said, like, there's kind of different levels of abuse I'm sure we can talk about as well, and there's opinions and there's abuse, but abuse to someone whether it be psychological, very nasty abuse to their family, to themselves individually, that needs to be stopped straight away. But unfortunately, within sport, you're going to have negative opinions, so to speak, about your performance and so on and so forth. I don't think we'll ever be able to avoid that conversation happening. I think it's up to players to try and figure out a way of either not engaging with that, or being able to engage with it and deal with it mentally, that it won't affect them.
53106. My son plays senior county football. I attend games with his fiancée. The abuse shouted from the stands towards players. My son really upsets her. It's taken a long time for her to become resilient to it. I've heard it for years since underage football. Would it be the case, Colm, that it's gone from perhaps the sidelines to the phone now?
Well, I think that study we did, John, beforehand, players said they actually, more 72% of players said they actually experienced it mostly at club level.
Right.
And that was face-to-face, verbal abuse, some physical stuff, and many verbal abuse. 84% I think was face-to-face on the field, and then another 30% was off the field from fans or from other people who were there, supporters. So like the most abuse people got was actually within the game, face-to-face or off the field at matches. So I think there's a big, massive problem there with the culture regards abuse at GAA games. I think that's a massive problem. I've seen it even going back to club now myself, supporters to referees to managers to players, the abuse is just quite high. So if it's happening there, it becomes very easy, to Mark's point, it becomes very easy to bring that across onto social media as this is acceptable. We can do it. If we can do it in person, we can do it online. If we can abuse a manager, abuse a player, abuse a referee there, and there's no really repercussions or no one's really pulling it up, then what's the problem with doing it online? And I think that's a good place for us to start about how do we make the GAA culture a little more respectful from the abuse being shouted at people or players from the stands, from people on sidelines, and so on and so forth. So I think that definitely is an issue that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, there was hassle as well at a Longford Town Bray Wanderers game last night, and have you haven't seen that in any way improve then, Colm? It's just as bad as it was when you maybe started playing Gaelic football at the club level in GAA, the unacceptable behaviour that seems to be seen as acceptable when you're in the cauldron of this game.
It's probably, I don't know if it's improved. It's improved. I'm probably even seeing it more now. I'm back at club now a bit more. I'm seeing it more. It's definitely more prevalent in club foot. I can see. Like, I think when you're involved with county, you get a few comments from the stands and all, but you don't really maybe hear it as much. In club, obviously, it's a little quieter, and you can maybe hear the comments come out, and it's probably the same 3 or 4 people doing it. But I think it's definitely not getting better from my experiences. I think it takes a club itself and to actually sit back and go, well, do we have the right policy or the right standards for our actions from supporters and from management and so on the field? I think there's some great clubs that are trying to make changes there, and I can see the improvements in some clubs, but it's not happening everywhere. And it's a culture thing as well, John. Like that goes with any club and any sport. If the culture is wrong within not just the players, but outside, even with regards to the community of the club, you're going to have problems with abuse in all stances.
There was an article in the Irish Examiner, I'm just going to go through it here, that social media giants were not taking online abuse seriously, according to Mary O'Connor from the Federation of Irish Sports. That represents 110 sporting organisations across the country, including 81 national governing bodies, 29 local sports partnerships. She told TDs it's not nice out there at the moment. Talking about what can we do, a number of recommendations including large-scale sport capital infrastructure, funding applications to plans to tackle abuse directed towards referees, officials, players and sport at both governance and club level. There'll be an online safety and media regulation bill which will create commissioner positions, promises to shore up the serious gap both internationally and in Ireland when it comes to addressing harmful online content. When she was asked by Malcolm Byrne if Twitter and Facebook are taking abuse seriously, she said no. So do you see in this bill or in these meetings, Mark Smyth, that things can improve in terms of maybe part of your funding is to have, signage condemning abuse, that there has to be almost like protocols in place for you to be a part of the community to get what you need to get, and this is just part of the health and safety of it?
I don't think I think the devil will be in the detail, and we haven't seen enough of it yet. We have got the high level recommendations, but having that online safety commissioner, I think one of the positive things that they're going to do is have more consistency to the digital literacy education that's going to come out. So at the moment we have an ad hoc basis. People will come in, do a talk in the class, do a talk here in a school or a club, but there's no consistency to the message that's there. So we need a national conversation where there is actually a curriculum about here is how you behave and interact responsibly online. As I mentioned earlier, I think if the online complaints mechanism isn't there, then that's going to be massively disappointing. I think we've seen in Australia, they have been world leaders on this in terms of making sure that digital companies are held to account. And it is going to come down to that. I think we certainly have some political momentum behind it, but it's going to need a lot of political capital, and it's going to need a lot of financial capital in order to get this off the ground, because what we don't want is a system that's set up to protect people and not resourced to do it. And we've seen it with other semi-state bodies where the complaints mechanism has got overwhelmed because there hasn't been the funding to do it. So I think we need to make sure that any system that's set up both has the legislative teeth, but also financial resources to actually make a difference here.
Anna, are people beginning to see the women's game in rugby for what it is and starting to understand maybe the sacrifices you did make and the players are currently making, and the players who represent their country? You've 16 caps for Ireland, you've worn the green, what you're going through, and it's just not something that can be dismissed as part of immature fun online.
Yeah, it's bumpy, but I do think there's a fan base there now that's growing massively. A lot of that is thanks to social media, and they're very understanding of where the game is at. So what you have, is massive losses at the hands of a team like England, and a lot of the conversation then afterwards, maybe before it would have been like, again, disband the women's game, they're rubbish. But now what you have, like for the first time this year, like overpoweringly, I saw the conversation was make these girls professional, and that's that's a change, because these scorelines have been happening between England and Ireland for a while, because England have been pushing their professionalisation and we and other countries haven't. And up to kind of this year, the conversation was, oh, sure, they're just useless. What's the point? But now it's a fan base that has been educated through social media and now has an understanding of why the scoreline is this way, and is then using their voice to be like, it's time we turn professional. So this is a good side of things. And I do think that it has changed. It has changed somehow, because also if you have someone who decides to say something about, and like Mark was saying earlier, often in the women's game, it's about the body shape, because it's, again, traditionally different to the traditional men's shapes and sizes. A lot of people commenting on, the weight, or how a player looks, or how we play, or whatever. And that understanding has grown and it has changed, I think. And if you have someone who says something negatively about it, you have a whole band of other supporters online ready to batten them down and talk them down and retaliate. And I think when I started, saying things or just retaliating, I suppose, online, so many people said to me, Anna, why would you bother? Don't bother. Well, like I say, I'm glad I did now. And I think that movement of stepping in and being like, actually, no, where the game is at, particularly for women's rugby, is, just such a sticky kind of phase where you have teams that are moving on to professionalization and others who aren't. And then when it all becomes professional and everyone in Six Nations, or everyone, however we're going to decide to do it down the line, when everyone is pro, well, then we can have the conversations about where the game is really at and what the performances are really like. And then hopefully at that stage, this, what Mark is talking about, our legislation and these big social media companies, this is all very new. We can learn from Australia or whoever, but in Ireland, we're going to have to find a way to tackle this, and we've got to protect our sports people, because we love sport in this country. And, just because you're Irish doesn't mean that you get to, send abuse at a player online because they're representing Ireland. No, that's not how it's going to be. And yeah, we it took a while to learn it, but I do think that, and sadly with, the cases that have happened this week in GA and stuff, they can learn from other sports. And I do think that I have seen positive change. So I think that will continue to come. And I'm hoping that we're not here again in another year's time having this same conversation, because we've had this conversation before. And I hope that it's going to be one of the last times that we're having this particular one. And in future, it's about how it's changing, how it's moving on. And this is probably the first time I've been able to say I have seen positive change, because I have seen it.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to have the conversation. People might not have heard the conversation a year ago. I don't think you can have the conversation enough about unacceptable behaviour online. Robert Balakoon, by the way, scored a try for Ulster. They trailed the Stormers by 10 points to 5 in that URC semi-final conversion to come for Ulster. It is Cork 2-3, Antrim 1-3 in the hurling preliminary quarter-final at Corrigan Park into the first half there, as that conversion goes off the post. So 10-5 still to the Stormers. And Wexford lead Kerry by 7 points to 5 at Austin Stark Park. The elaborate, the crazy nature of this stuff, Colm Begley, the two Johnny stuff, like all, you know, the lengths that people go to I don't know, mess up people's heads on social media. I don't know. You'd laugh if it wasn't serious.
Yeah, and that's it's something like, I don't know whether it'd be able to done, but greater transparency and accountability. You mentioned before, like having to put your name to something. That hopefully will reduce it. It may not, but at least you have who's saying what. You know where it's coming from. Not multiple accounts and fake accounts coming here and there. I think it's a massive thing. I think as well for us, I suppose in GAA, let's start with the culture shift down to ground too, in person at clubs, the county games. Let's not have abuse being allowed there either. You know, let's change that narrative first, and then also look at online. So I agree with that. It's a conversation we'll have to keep on having, I think, every so often. But as long as there's changes being made, John, as long as there's improvements being made, looking at best practice from Australia and different places like that, what can we do? Let's mitigate it as best we can. Let's reduce it as best we can. Let's educate our young athletes and players and individuals, and then just try and reduce it to the level where we can handle it, or it's not acceptable, but it can be managed.
Yeah, it was interesting that Andy McAtee in his interview yesterday on OTB AM talked about letters to the house and anonymous stuff and all that kind of thing. But on the whole, he spoke about, look, there's a guy who sends me a letter every week about ahead of every match, talking about the tactics and this and that, and that's their identity, and the fact that person can do that and have a relationship with Andy or whoever. I'm sure it happens. I'm sure the majority, Colm, of people that you hear from are good and want it to succeed and want to channel their support in a positive way, and the majority of people do that. But it's just a case of, look, we just got to highlight the fact that these actual words, these things, these messages can have a detrimental impact on people's mental health that play sport, and just because they play sport doesn't mean they're immune to being hurt by it.
Exactly. No, there's loads of great stuff coming in. There's loads of great support from fans in person, online, but obviously the impact that has compared to the real negative stuff and abuse you can get is different. You have a really serious impact, and I think Andy was great to hear from him speak about it. He spoke very well, and he gave a great service to me over the years. So, he handled it by himself, and I think even from what I'm getting from him, the way it affected more so family members and people around him, he kind of was resilient enough to take it and handle it himself. But that shouldn't be happening. Letters to people's houses and comments online. So, I think it's something we keep on having a conversation about.
53106, if sports people use social media for positive reinforcement, then of course when they get negative comments it's going to affect them badly. However, if they understand that strangers online make comments both positive and negative based on how they're feeling at the time, then as Colm said, maybe there won't be too much weight on the comments, either negative or positive. Mark Smyth, what's the next steps then? What do you want to see in this debate going forward over the next 12 months, as Anna was talking about there?
I think there's lots of ways that we can improve. Well, I think once we have this acceptance, unfortunately, that for the moment this is going to occur, but because we know it's going to occur, there's lots of steps proactively we can take to prepare players in advance for this. So one of the roles that Rugby Players Ireland has is through their player development managers. They will hold workshops with their players and say, look, here's what's going to happen on social media, here's how you should handle it, here's what the impact is going to be, emphasizing about the positive ways that they can use social media, that's not just about taking abuse, but how you respond to it. So I think we need to, with our sports people, be having these conversations and preempting it, that this is going to happen and here's our advice about how you can do it. And if it impacts you, here are the supports that you can access. And I know through the GPA, they provide a counselling service for the players. Through Rugby Players Ireland, we have the wellbeing service that players can access support. So again, resilience sometimes is about being able to get help and to get that support, be it through a fellow player, through someone who's been through it before, or a counselling and support service if needed, if there. So it's about being able to have that education, but also have those supports there for the person and not just the player. Because once we realise that it's the person who needs the support and they're not immune to it, then we can be more compassionate in how we meet the needs of the person as well as the player.
Are athletes a little bit uncomfortable, do you think, Mark, at times coming forward, given the image of like mental toughness they want to portray?
I think that message has been changing. I think there's been wonderful work done in reducing stigma in multiple areas over the years. And this perception that if you're physically strong, that means you're mentally strong and can cope with all this. I think we're really changing that conversation. I think the Tackle Your Feelings campaign that Rugby Players Ireland have been championing for a number of years has been amazing, because we've had, really good ambassadors like Joey Carberry, Emer Considine, John Cooney coming out and talking about their mental health, talking about the challenges that they've had and the tools that they've used to overcome it. So we've seen social media in particular being a medium by which we can broadcast that message, that you can be a world-class player and also at times have self-doubt, have anxiety, struggle with your mental health, and find a way to manage that. So I think when we're talking with social media and online abuse, we also have to balance that out with the positives that come from it, that sense of connection, reducing stigma, and encouraging people to go forward for help seeking by having really positive role models like we have.
Yeah, Colm, I'm sure there are positives for you to be on the Twitter or on social media. It is a great way of just connecting pretty directly with what's going on around you, but also the GA community.
Yeah, well, for initially, it's probably used to the communication to your network, your friends, your family, whatever it might be. For players or for athletes, it's a way of building the profile too. Like, even though we're amateur, players do build their profile and try and grow the game as well. And I mentioned it, like, it has been massive to grow the game, female side of the game, lower tier sports and competitions. So it has a huge use in that end. But with the good comes the bad. But I think if we can focus on how to promote more good than bad, I know it sounds very cliche, but focus on that. And like what's been said before, try and figure out ways of reducing the online abuse to a lower level. It still is very useful. We had a rookie camp with our first year players or 1 to 3 year players over the last number of years, and one of the areas you look at is social media and your brand. Kieran Fyle came over to us and spoke about your actions, an online audit of your actions and your imprints first of all, and Anna mentioned about liking stuff, and players were kind of looking at what they've done and what they've written and reassessing that, and then the next one was how to deal with effectively engaging with social media. And it was really powerful here out there to look at using it and maybe tools to use it more effectively and how to deal with comments that come into them. So I think it's right saying that we have to look at that, and Mark said workshops and different education possible again in tools will be really useful for young players going forward.
And Anna, your final word? You have the final word on this, Anna?
Yeah, well, like I said, when the next time we talk about it, it'll be, moved on again. And I think that comes from, the conversation we're having today, people talking about it with each other, sports, sports sharing their own experiences across codes, and like the openness and the mental health side of things is definitely helping that as well. So I think, yeah, we need to be strong, like online, in fighting this and not just let it happen, and be very smart if we do decide to retaliate, but also in picking your battles and things like that. It's all learning, and this is, like I said before, it's all new, and these conversations are going to help how positively it will move forward. And it's really great to be part of this and to talk about it. And I hope to again have it even more positive again down the line and say, yes, I've seen this change, and I'm happy with how this is going.
Well, Anna Caplice, ex-Irish rugby star, Colm Begley, former Laois star, AFL player and clinical psychologist Mark Smyth. The great thing is, folks, we did not get one negative comment for the last 45 minutes. So that's all I can say in a positive way.
They were too scared.
Yeah. Have a great day, folks. Enjoy your Saturday. Enjoy the weekend. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks,
Mel.
Thanks,
okay.
Thanks,